Thanks very
Cool.
much for joining us. I was so sad when you left, and I guess I only heard about it. Oh, Coleman's gone, right? I was just like, whoa, but because obviously it was a failure on Stony Brook's side to not do something. But on the other hand, I'm so glad that you landed somewhere so sweet, and I'm also really delighted you're retaining the association with IACS. So let's
Thank
try and
you.
make something of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, great. So let me see if I go here and um, um, and I go play. Okay, hold on one sec. So sorry, for anyone who's shared screen on Keynote on Zoom, I go in and I can play it like normally?
Yeah, I think that's exactly just go into presentation mode and then share your screen on Zoom. I think it just should
Okay,
should just work.
Do you need to see your presenter notes, Coleman, or you're good without them?
I want to be able to, yeah.
Okay. So, um, there's a trick to it. Because basically you want to use your Zoom as your secondary
Yeah,
monitor.
I have my notes separately too. I can also do it without like seeing them, but I was hoping to be able to
Yeah. There's a trick and I forget it.
um
Let's
sorry.
all start Googling.
I'm really sorry. Ah, okay, so I'll go here. Um
Most notes on Google are saying you need a second physical screen, and you just display on that. Um,
um um
what it's saying here is set Keynote to play in window. So instead of in full screen, you do play in window,
There, that's it. Yep.
and
so play in window.
then play in
So
window, and then you
Play in
share the
window.
window instead of sharing your screen. Okay.
okay.
So when you share your screen, you click on that window that you've
Okay.
created.
I want to
Yeah.
put this link into the Zoom chat
Okay.
window.
Let
And
me
I need to fully disclose here, I'm a Linux user, so I got no clue how to use a Mac. They're way too
so if I'm
user-friendly from my
here.
perspective.
So here you can see does everyone see a everyone sees like a car, like half of a sculpture sort of
Just
on a clear
black.
background.
I
I'm
just
just
see a
gonna
dark screen. Yeah.
just black.
Okay, then let me try it one more time. Now it says my screen sharing is paused. Hmm.
Nothing from here.
All right, then let's do this. What about now? Resume share? No.
Yeah, we saw it. Screen sharing for a hot second there.
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah, okay, good. I didn't, but I'm further away.
Yep.
There we go.
Okay. So so you can see this, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Now, okay, great. Now let me see if I can make it so that I can see my notes and then I'll be ready to go. Give me one second. Um on my phone. Ah. Um, okay, I have, great. So now, just gonna send myself the notes. I'm really sorry. I don't know why I assumed I would just be able to go straight from Keynote.
Because it should be easier.
All right. So,
Okay, everybody, I think Coleman is ready to start. So I will do a quick introduction. This is Coleman Collins. He was briefly a member of the art department at Stony Brook. We miss him dearly. His work is very technological in nature. He was part of the Future History Studios with Stephanie Dinkins, and he thinks a lot about the sort of global movement of culture and money, and does these really in-depth pieces that sort of leverage the technology of our day and data in order to make points about our society.
yeah, great. Um, Thank you, and sorry to everyone. It's just like, I guess this is a kind of common thing, like working with technology. There's always something. I want to thank you for the invitation, and also I'll just say that I think, what I do is kind of loosely computational. I'm really thinking about the digital, and more often than not about the effects of that, but not necessarily like hard computational science or whatever. But I hope that it's useful, and hope that it's interesting. So I just want to talk about a few projects and how they came together, and how they might be related. Okay. Okay, so the title of this presentation is called Guilt, Debt, Generation Loss. Another option for the title might have been Repetition and Difference. I often find myself like returning to things that I've dealt with before, and you might see things appear and reappear in different iterations. As you can see here, like this is in French, and this is, I've talked about this in other languages too. So first I want to start by talking about debt. And when I talk about debt, you might think of inheritance or obligation. Okay, so this is a photo of my grandmother in her hometown of Ahoskie, North Carolina. I've inherited many things from my grandmother, not least of which is a propensity to splurge on clothing. My grandmother was the type to dress up for every occasion, like even if she was just standing out in front of the woods. This is a house that she bought in New York. And when she wasn't buying clothes for her grandkids, she was putting money toward the mortgage. And slowly she paid it off until she owned it outright. When she passed away a few years ago, I inherited a share of the house. My father and uncle had already died a decade earlier. And so my brother and sister and I sold the house and each took a third. I spent most of that going to art school. And as a result of that gift, I didn't have to take out any student loans. So in some senses, I'm debt-free. This is the only photo I have of my great-grandmother. She was born enslaved in North Carolina in 1860. She never learned to read, but was said to be extremely good with numbers. I feel personally incredibly indebted to these people and their struggles, their sacrifices. And I want to talk about this and start with this because I believe that relationships of debt and obligation, both big and small, interpersonal and international, structure our world. One can hardly talk about decolonization without mention of the crushing debt that France imposed on Haiti, just as the plundering of cultural artifacts by Western museums amounts to a debt, both psychic and material, that must be repaid. And in our own lives, we have to reckon with what we owe to other people, the small debts we owe to friends and lovers, the metaphysical debts we owe to our parents, our ancestors. What have we inherited and from whom? How can we contend with the stubbornly present past? The first project I want to share is a 2-channel film called Distancing Determining. It consists of iPhone footage from my personal archive. As you can see, there were 2 channels. The right one was reserved for everything east of the Atlantic, and the left one represented the West. As footage from a given location played, the opposite channel showed its precise longitudinal coordinates. You can see that on the left side. And it's a kind of like automatic thing that your iPhone will do, is like geotagging images and videos. So this work was ultimately a kind of ruminative tracing of the notion of the diaspora. I was heavily influenced by Christina Sharpe's In the Wake, in which she develops several key ideas, one of which is the hold, which is a state of sort of ontological captivity that Black people the world over find themselves in. The full thing is about 25 minutes, and I'll play a short clip now. Let me just make sure that we're optimized for video clip. Okay. Okay.
You do me wrong now. My love is strong now. You really got a hold on me. You really got a hold on me. You really got a hold on me. I love you, and all I want you to do is just hold me, hold me, hold me, hold me. Tighter.
Oh, sorry. Clicked.
Negroes or suppress the Negroes or even frighten the Negroes. Whenever something happens, 20 police cars converge on one area.
Mesdames et messieurs, afin de respecter la législation douanière, la vente d'alcool et de tabac dans notre magasin cessera dans 5 minutes. Les passagers qui iront acheter ces produits sont priés de se rendre en caisse dès à présent. Merci.
All right, so that was Steve Rhodes, and the London High Lifers with the song called Ojurere. Okay, so right now, Lagos, we are about to wrap things up in the show today, but yeah, just so you know, right before that one, it was King Sunny Ade with the song called Ekela Fomode, and it also has an Emperor Pick Pitters there with the song called Omodede. Okay, all right. Right before that, it was African Rhythm Messengers with Bottom Bele. We also had some pickups guitar band with Eddie Consa. Going through some of your messages right now. Got this one in here by Balu7, who says, Feel Good Fridays and Casbah are the best. I guess if I had been born in the 60s or 70s in Nigeria, I probably would have had a high life or juju band called Emperor Chief Dr. Balu7 and his Supersonic Experimenters band. All right, that was Balu7 from Ikos Igwe. I am totally feeling that because only you are Emperor Chief and Doctor, which are supersonic experimenters. That will have been very interesting, by the way. All right, so this one in here says, thank you for the good oldies. Thanking God for the gift of life because I love the music and I also love my life. Fantastic. And of course, yes, EOJ reaching out from Ikoyi and still loving music and loving life.
Walking customer go to GT direct, which is not what we discussed at all. So I don't know, but at this point you guys are marketing a thing that doesn't exist. So I think you need to be the ones to speak to them. I shouldn't be negotiating with them on your behalf. But I mean, you've made me an offer based on the terms of arrangements you have with them, and the bank says you don't have those terms of arrangements. So it's not a very professional way to do this thing right now.
Okay. The bag is ready. All right.
You really got a hold on me. You really got a hold on me.
That's me. That's kind of tentatively singing on there. That work was also shown in tandem with this sculpture called Water Always Finds Its Own Level. It mirrored the orientation of the film. It's primarily constructed out of crowd control stanchions and do-rags, or wave caps, as we always called them back home. Here's a detail. After the show opened, I was rereading Poetics of Relation by Edouard Glissant and noticed this little drawing in a footnote where he says, the slave trade came through the cramped doorway of the slave ship, leaving a wake like that of the crawling desert caravans. It might be drawn like this, and there's a little glyph. African countries to the east, the lands of America to the west. This creature is in the image of the Fibril. Although I had been reading a lot of Glissant and preparing this work, the echo, that of the glyph and the orientation of the film and sculpture, was entirely inadvertent. Sometimes you find these little serendipitous resonances, though. Here's the work in a different setting. The sort of spatial activation differs depending on how it's installed. And to return to the film, here's an image from Calais, which is a small town in the north of France that sits directly across the English Channel from Dover. I was living about 20 minutes away at the time. Europe's largest refugee camp had formed a few miles away from the Channel Tunnel. People from all over the world had come to France hoping to cross into England. They would stow away on trucks packed with goods headed for the UK market. So the entire highway was lined with barbed wire in order to keep them out. Even after Brexit, the free movement of goods and capital was paramount. But this movement always needed to be protected, quote unquote, from the free movement of people in search of refuge and care. Here's an image from La Jungle de Calais, or La Camp de la Lande. It's the former refugee camp on the outskirts of the town. Christina Sharp actually uses it as a paradigmatic example of the hold. Having actually visited the site several times while I was living in a small town nearby, I found that her theorization of the space aligned with my own perception. This sign has stayed with me ever since. I found echoes of this language at the African American Cultural Center in South Central LA. Here we see an image from an income tax / check cashing joint on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles. Here's a brief moment at Obama Court in central Johannesburg, South Africa. And this is one of my favorite moments from the film. It's Nigerians selling motivational business and consulting books on the streets of Lagos. A lot of the work I find myself making examines the movement of capital, both material and psychic, the way it operates on our bodies and has effects in the physical world, but also the way that it permeates dreams and aspirations around the globe. And this, taped to the wall in an old slave barracks in Badagry, Nigeria, is an admission of guilt from the descendants of one of the largest slave trading families on the Nigerian coast, which, to this day, remains the only apology for the legacy of slavery that I've ever seen. I'm always thinking about guilt and reparation, the way metaphysical debts might imply certain obligations. I'm wondering what it would look like for these obligations to be acknowledged in my own country. And perhaps there are certain debts that can never be fully repaid. This next project is called A Good Man is Hard to Find. It's from 2019. It ended up being this kind of standalone, ready-made sculptural project. But first, I'm going to show part of a video that illustrates the genesis of the work and initially was shown in tandem with the objects.
21-year-old Trenton Lewis goes the extra mile for his job at UPS. Actually, it's several miles. To start loading trucks by 4 a.m., he starts walking from his home in downtown Little Rock before midnight.
New at 6:30, this could very well be the best story of the newscast. An act of kindness by police leads to a brand new bike for a young man who was actually spending 4 hours a day walking to and from his job. He's a 19-year-old from Vallejo who was trying to save money to buy a car and to pay for college, so he's been walking to his job in Benicia several days a week.
But now, an unexpected act of kindness. He's getting some help with his commute thanks to a police officer who took notice. KTVU's Christina Rodone is live now in Benicia with this story. Christina.
He is the man who has gained national attention after a Detroit Free Press article shed light on his need for transportation.
James Robertson has been walking 21 miles to work and never, ever missed a day on the job.
Riding his bike on busy roads just to make it to work so he can support his wife who was ill. But now a Good Samaritan who recently saw him, gave him a lift during Saturday night's snowstorm, is sharing the story, hoping it will help get a hardworking man a new set of wheels. This story's gone viral. You're seeing it right now. Fox 2's Dave Spencer.
First showed you this Facebook post on Friday from the owner of Papa Roo on Indy's east side. He explained that he found a man walking across the city following an ice storm simply for a job interview. Well, now you can see that post has more than almost 15,000 likes, comments from people across the country, and now these people are hoping this story will compel others to do the same.
Remember Patrick Edmond? We shared his story with you last week. He walks to work every day from Plano to McKinney. That's 12 miles, 3.5 hours, 5 days a week. But today, all of that changed. Here's Jobin Paniker.
This is the halfway point of a 2-hour trip to work an 8-hour shift, a 4-hour daily walk just to get a paycheck.
And that bus brings him here to Big Beaver in Coolidge in Troy, right outside of the Somerset Collection. And from here, this is where he starts his 7-mile walk to Crooks Road. And it takes him 2.5 hours.
I can't imagine not working. You know, I didn't want to end up doing nothing. You know, it's, you know, did you know how long it took me to find this job?
Just going to work and ask if you all right, you need a ride.
The man known for walking has to do just a little bit more.
Oh, good. Good. I'm blessed.
Today, Patrick Edmond sees what goodness gets you.
Okay, and then sign the line.
But first, he'll have to sign for it.
The Detroiter, whose incredible story of walking 21 miles to and from work for the last decade, now has a new ride.
I don't like it. I love it.
A brand new burgundy Ford Taurus, the car Robertson had been dreaming about. A GoFundMe page started by Wayne State student Evan Leedy now stands at more than $300,000. Evan says people from 11 countries have left messages of support on that site for Mr. Robertson.
Very emotional. It's exciting. It's really exciting to see. I'm glad that we could get James the car of his dreams, exactly what he wanted, and it's cool.
Blake Pollock is the UBS banker who got to know Robertson last year after driving by him and giving him rides when the weather was bad. Just a few days ago, Pollock made some calls, and within moments, David Fisher Jr. of Suburban Ford in Sterling Heights was all in. Pollock says he joked with Robertson that now he's the one who's going to want to ride.
I told him that, when he gets this car, I'm selling mine, and, I'm his responsibility now. Really, I'm glad he's going to have the independence that a car provides.
We took care of all the paperwork, and, we'll make sure all the taxes, so James is truly getting a free car.
After seeing this incredible moment, James Robertson went to work. Since he hasn't driven in a while, a dealership employee drove him there. Come Monday, Robertson says he'll be the one in the driver's seat. New car, new way of getting to work, but still the same guy.
Deep down inside, I get all this now, but I'm still the same man that I've always been.
In Sterling Heights, Anu Prakash, 7 Action News.
Yeah, that getting to work is the most critical thing to him. I've mentioned to you before that my sister has gotten to know him.
Yeah.
And she just says it's like, okay, well, he may be available, but he's got to be to work at 2 o'clock. I mean, that's what's important to him and always has been. And that's why I think his story has touched the hearts of so many people, right? And we're not done.
For a long time, I created an archive of clips of men who walked to work, were pitied by the general public, who then pitched in to help them out. Sometimes they bought him a car, sometimes it was a bike. It was always a man. He was almost always Black. And it was really, really important that the man be going to work. He had to be a productive laborer, earning his keep, demonstrating his value. Only then could he be rewarded. I homed in on one story in particular. An auto worker in Detroit walked to work every day for 20 years. His story was publicized, and people around the world raised $300,000 for him in a GoFundMe. He rented a new apartment, and a local newspaper reporter and a photographer followed him to his new home. The images in A Good Man is Hard to Find are appropriated from this very first photo shoot. In it, the photographer asks him to pose, doing a series of actions that show his gratitude by displaying his work ethic for the camera. He cleans his car, washes the dishes, wipes down his new coffee table. Even in his new apartment, he's asked to enact a performance of labor. I appropriated these images and had them printed on coffee mugs. I displayed Walking Man videos from my archive on a small screen, laid the mugs out in my studio, and invited people to drink from them. You can see a kind of hint of coffee stains on the one on the right. For me, the form represented a further exacerbation of a cycle of consumption. The act becomes news story, becomes image, becomes object. Here's how it was installed. Beyond the cycle of consumption, there was a strange ritual being enacted here, something to do with guilt, harm, and reparation. The man only needs to walk to work because of disinvestment in public infrastructure. The viewer feels a sense of guilt at seeing the man suffering, which must be atoned for through a financial contribution. The man, in turn, becomes indebted to them, and his performance of gratitude is his payment. I want to talk more about guilt. And when I say guilt, you can think debt. In A Good Man is Hard to Find, I had identified a sort of latent guilt economy that exists all around us, little rituals of guilt reduction. There are a lot of examples. There are coffee companies that claim to donate books to school children with every bag of beans you buy, glasses companies that do the same. To my mind, all of these transactions represent attempts at allaying the guilt of participating in a larger system. I was curious about what would happen if this process was streamlined, and Guiltcoin is a thought experiment that follows this logic. At first, it was just an idea with no home, but after a chance studio visit with a German curator named Diedrich Diedrichsen, I was able to make it a reality. We talked about a few shared reference points. Having studied German as a child, I had long been fascinated by the fact that guilt and debt are expressed by the same word, Schuld. I was also heavily influenced by David Graeber's Debt, The First 5,000 Years, and Nietzsche's notion of the creditor-debtor relationship in the genealogy of morality. Graeber's work is an anthropological account of how the emergence of money is intimately related to debt, with guilt arising from that feeling of indebtedness. I wanted to see what would happen if we could collapse the distinction between the two different types of Schuld by creating a currency that was directly tied to guilt. That's Guiltcoin, a cryptocurrency that promises guilt reduction for whomever acquires it. Dietrich gave me the opportunity to develop the work for a show in Vienna. Here's an install shot of the exhibition at the museum. There we are in the corner on the right. It was my first invitation to show work in a museum, and as the initial impetus for the work had to do with the aforementioned linguistic resonances, I was excited to be able to produce this work in a German-speaking context. The project had a number of elements. First, an actual functioning coin, an ERC20 token on the Ethereum blockchain. Then there were a series of video advertisements that played in the space. But the main part of the project were the guilt consultations. The rest of the work served to provide a structure for the more affective encounter of the consultation. Dietrich also serves as a professor of theory and cultural studies at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and he introduced me to several of his master's and doctoral students so they could serve as additional performers. There were Anna, Diana, Caroline, Chandra, Natalia, Melanie, Miriam, Leah, and Lucia. This is my initial message to the performers. You can see kind of an important part that's highlighted. The idea was that they'd be a kind of hybrid between tech consultants and therapists. You can kind of think of like an Apple Genius Bar employee, but with like much more empathy. The plan was that they'd meet with museum goers to have in-depth conversations about their existential guilt. This is the Vorschlag, or the recommendation sheet. The consultant would speak to the museum goer about their relationship with existential guilt before making a recommendation. It was kind of like a prescription. Each visitor received a note with a suggested amount of guilt to displace after their consultation. Because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to perform myself, and we ultimately developed the performance over Google Docs and Zoom. Conversations went on in English and German. I got really lucky with the participants, as they were all graduate students, and they kind of had their own particular ideas about the work and the sort of theoretical apparatus that underpinned it. Here, a performer relates Guiltcoin to Marx's concept of the money fetish, and it's translated here. So she says, the value of a money arises, so to speak, through a collective illusion, whereby Marx repeatedly emphasizes that it is not to be understood as mere deception, because the thing, in this case money, takes on a character of its own and controls us as individuals through our ascription. Guiltcoin is my understanding of objectifying guilt in a similar way and making existential guilt an abstract property of a currency, in this case, not euros or dollars, but Guiltcoin. Through our work as consultants, we help to create a collective illusion about the properties of Guiltcoin as debt reducing, attributions that lead to Guiltcoin having its own character. And again, I have to say, like, what a pleasure it is to have collaborators who take the work as seriously as this. Okay. Ultimately, I was like extremely fascinated by what the performance activated in the audiences. Because of a few technical issues and privacy concerns, we didn't record the performances, and instead, each consultant submitted performance reports that summarized their encounters. The context was extremely specific. With Austria's World War II legacy and the history with the Holocaust, many visitors were uncomfortable with the idea that guilt could be erased. It had become part of the national identity, something that people were quite attached to, like discursively at least. Here's an excerpt of a visitor whose guilt took on a very different valence. He was wrestling with a sort of survivor's guilt after having fled Syria during the Civil War. And here's a little excerpt. March 10th, and this is translated from the original German. He sat down immediately and asked me a lot of questions about the performance. When I asked him about his last feeling of guilt, he replied with, "Guilt is a story of my life." From our previously very relaxed exchange, it sounded like a joking exaggeration to me, and I had to laugh. But when he began a very personal monologue, I realized that I had apparently misunderstood his facial expressions and that he was really serious. He originally grew up in Damascus, but had to flee due to the critically dangerous situation, and then left 5 years ago for Austria. He spoke of an omnipresent feeling of guilt that has accompanied him since his escape and is constantly present in his everyday life in Vienna. The subconscious feeling of guilt for having abandoned the family in Syria and being able to have a safe life here. He would feel definitely guilty about living happily and freely, but the departure from Damascus and the distance to... It goes on. I was really pleased by the way that the work could allow for multiple points of entry. It was really important for me for it to remain open. January 10th. She brought the example of hearing at home, you ought to eat all that's on your plate. Think of the children in Africa who are starving. It was a very interesting talk. It didn't reach a theoretical level per se, and it was also not about looking at something that might have been traumatic. For the client, it was instead something always perceived as non-harmful and normal nonsense. Now she was able to describe it as a generalized practice of instrumentalization of guilt feelings for practical purposes, getting your child to eat her dinner. The client was able to analyze these things from a certain distance and was seemingly enjoying it. Nevertheless, she always presented herself as not really having feelings of guilt or feeling guilty about anything. She presented herself as a very pragmatic person, and even things like the climate crisis were something to worry about. It goes on. This client's mind went directly toward having been guilted into finishing her dinner for the quote-unquote starving children in Africa, which is instructive. Although Austria is a particular context, and most of the conversations did not touch explicitly on race, on some level, the African other loomed as an icon of existential guilt in an almost Fanonian fashion. I'm currently working on developing this for a US context, and I'm excited about the possibilities for dialogue here and how questions of racial guilt and reparation might be broached. I want to finish by sharing some newer work that deals with these same questions of inheritance and obligation, but with an eye toward the digital. I'm going to start with an excerpt from a video called Dispersion. I was traveling through Nigeria with a good friend of mine who had recently moved to Lagos. We were going from the mainland of the country to the barrier island and the door of no return. This is an image of a recent show at Brief Histories Gallery in New York entitled Body Errata. You can see the video installed on the right side there. The video played on 2 channels. The video on the top channel slowly gets more and more compressed as time goes on. The image gradually degrades. On the bottom channel there, a text appeared that says, "Dispersion seemed inevitable." Some years ago, my cousin called me up. She had been doing DNA research and found out that her grandfather, my grandfather, was not her grandfather. Our grandmother had had an affair. For this and other reasons, which I won't get into now, she was distressed about her heritage. She said, I never should have done it. I can't believe I passed these on, these bad genes. All this generational trauma. I didn't know how to respond. I did my own DNA test and found out I was at least 82% African, mostly Nigerian with a little bit of Congolese. I felt satisfyingly authentic. I had been a little worried about authenticity. A few years ago, I had been traveling through Nigeria with a friend and felt a strange wistfulness, a sort of longing. At a certain point during our trip, I had purchased a statue on an impulse, but later found out that it was inauthentic. The particular kind of bronze I was hoping to buy should have had a dull color, something specific to the clay used in the region. Mine was shiny and gaudy. In addition to getting a sense of where my genetic origins were, I also got a look at my entire 15,000 plus character gene sequence. It looks like this. Looking at this felt strange. My body turned into language, totally abstracted, variations on a few proteins. I felt as if I could stand outside myself and observe. This is a small work that sort of anchored the exhibition. It's a copy of an erratum notice. Erratum is a singular form of the word, errata is the plural. These notices are often inserted in publications when printing errors have been made and it is too late to correct the main text. I also got a list of the places on my sequence where specific mutations had occurred. Here, I've printed them on vellum and overlaid them over another image. In seeing these mutations laid plain, I was reminded of the old identity paradox. And some of you may be familiar with it. Sometimes it's called the ship of Theseus. At other times, it's referred to as the paradox of grandfather's axe. Say that you inherit an old axe from your grandfather, but eventually have to make some repairs. First, the handle gets exchanged for a new one, then the head, then a new handle, a new head, and so on. Is it the same axe? Anyway, I 3D scanned the sculpture and started playing around with it. I wondered, was the process of inheritance and mutation a cutting, a slicing, a chopping? Anyway, my cousin called me up. She had been doing DNA research. She found out that her grandfather was not my grandfather. Our grandmother had had an affair. For this and other reasons, which I won't get into now, she was distressed. She said to me, how can I pass these along, these bad genes? All this generational trauma I got in me? I wasn't quite sure how to deal with it. This is a close-up of a work called Sequential Shift. I made this by taking the original 3D scans of the statue and putting them into scenes on Blender, exporting images, then extruding them with depth maps. Then the STL files were carved with a CNC router. As I translated the information from format to format, there were always errors, slippages, décalage. I wondered, Is the process of inheritance a cutting or a twisting, a stretching? This image is derived from a scan of a replica Congolese Nkisi sculpture. The Nkisi traditionally represents a conduit to the spirit world and often contains sacred substances stored in the belly, which are generally shielded by a piece of glass or some other reflecting surface. This particular Nkisi statue is a recent example where, instead of a mirror, a shard of a compact disc is used. A memory device is embedded in a long-standing sculptural form, a technological remnant used in a pre-modern cultural practice. Here, I have doubled the disc. Its existence and insertion into the Nkisi form encapsulates something important for me about the interrelationship between culture and technology. Here are the two previous works shown side by side as they were installed in the show. They're both UV prints on dye bond. This work is called Data Self-Portrait. When I received the copy of my DNA sequence, I felt strange, abstract. I could stand outside of my body and observe it. The first video, Dispersion, alternated with another video called Ashy Genome. I'll play a little bit from that work now.
A A T T T C G G A.
This is the top channel. I had to get my skin extremely dry and ashy to be able to write on it. This is the bottom channel. This one is called Mother Board. It was made with a similar process. Here's a detail. I wrote a short text to accompany the exhibition, and here's how it went. The letters A, C, G, and T appear in numerous places throughout body errata, a direct reference to the artist's personal DNA sequence. Each unique sequence of bases directs the production of proteins, proteins that make up each of our bodies, mine, yours. Our bodies contain embedded code that is passed down through generations of captivity, migration, and other traumatic events. This process of copying and recopying is long, slow, and inexact. There are always errors. Pixelated images, corrupted files, repetition with the occasional jarring difference. Cut and paste, chop and screw. The process of inheritance is always in flux. As its constituent parts are eroded, broken off, and replaced, the true nature of the thing itself comes into question. The axis, handle, and head have been changed out many times over the years. Every plank in the ship has been switched out for another. We don't need to view this lack of fidelity between original and copy, ancestor and descendant, as a lack of authenticity. It might represent an opportunity, and at the very least, it's anti-deterministic. So the work is mostly considering information changing forms, the relationship between data and form, material that becomes immaterial and vice versa, cultural and material inheritance, like this process that happens over many generations that eventually creates mutations, gaps, décalage. How the noise in the signal produces new systems, how the nature of a thing is not consistent through time, but actually full of these mistakes or inconsistencies. And through these inconsistencies, we find a certain kind of generativity. This work is called Maybe the Last Time, I Don't Know. This title is partly a reference to a song, a Negro spiritual my grandfather always liked to sing at barbecues. Here's a detail. This work is called Tetrad. Here's a detail. This work is called No Mistakes. Here's a detail. This is laser engraved steel. Generation loss is the loss of quality between subsequent copies or transcodes of data. Anything that reduces the quality of the representation when copying and would cause further reduction in quality on making a copy of the copy can be considered a form of generation loss. File size increases are a common result of generation loss, as the introduction of artifacts may actually increase the entropy of the data through each generation. On our way from the mainland to the barrier island, there was a bit of commotion. I didn't understand. I couldn't speak the language, and though on some level I felt deeply connected, or else hopeful for a connection, the language barrier reminded me of the distance. But after some time, someone banged on the engine in just the right way, and the boat began to move again. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Coleman.
Thanks.
Can you tell us a little more about how you did the coin for the guilt?
Yeah, I just created an ERC token, and then I had a kind of an institution that, you know, it had, I mean, ultimately a lot of it got interrupted because of the pandemic. The show was scheduled for, I mean, it was 2020, 2021 in Vienna, and we got pushed back a lot, but yeah, we a couple people bought the coin, which was good. And I think but for me, the most lasting thing was the the way that the consultations went. I mean, it wasn't particularly difficult to create a Ethereum token. I think it was good to have that as an opportunity, but ultimately the hard part was convincing people to buy it, I think. But in a lot of ways it was a sort of MacGuffin, like a way to have there to be some kind of stakes in order to create the conditions for that type of conversation. And I felt like one of the really cool things about art context is that there's a sort of like suspension of disbelief where people are really ready to participate,
Mhm.
and sometimes they're ready for like a very strange performance. And I think, in a museum space, people come in thinking that there's going to be something strange, and their guard is kind of let down. And I felt like we were able to have some really, I did like a smaller version of that here in New York. And yeah, the breadth of conversations was really surprising. I want to be able to do it like in a larger scale. But it I think for a lot of people, I found that they hadn't really thought about, or they hadn't had to articulate things around guilt and obligation before, and not in a formal way. And I found that to be really useful and fascinating.
Have you gotten a chance to look at the people at IACS and think who might be interesting to collaborate with? I mean, we have some sociologists and
Not just yet, because I've had a lot of yeah, a lot of moving parts. I got married
yeah.
a month ago. I'm like
Hey, congrats.
yeah, just a lot of things, all good things, but
Oh.
I'm really excited about being able to continue having the opportunity to remain connected to that network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're losing people at a rapid pace because of these usually end at 2, so I think a lot of people had to leave at 2. Is there anybody else on the Zoom who wants to ask a question?
Okay.
Susan Brennan says that was wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Hey, Alan.
All right.